Singularity by William Sleator. 8. Fred! I shouted as I ran. Here, boy! Here I am, Fred! Don't go in there, Fred! Please, Fred! Here, boy! The playhouse door was closed and locked. For a moment, I felt a flood of relief. Barry had taken away the chair after all. Then another possibility occurred to me. I turned back to run for the keys. I almost bumped into Barry and Lucy. The keys! Did you bring the keys? Yeah, I have them, Barry said, just standing there. Open it! Hurry! I screamed. Okay, calm down, Barry said. Did you leave it open or not? Can't you remember? I think it was open, Lucy said, sounding scared. Barry opened the door. I pushed past him. Then I moaned and sank to my knees. The playhouse went dark as the door slammed behind the three of us. And I had the futile hope that I hadn't really seen what I thought. But a second later, Barry turned on the light, and there it was again. A pile of bones at the foot of the bed. It was not immediately recognizable and could possibly have been some other animal. It was the metal chain and dog tag lying among the bones on the stone floor that made the identification absolute. I closed my eyes. I felt the tears spring up and trickle down my cheeks, but I made no attempt to stop them or even hide them. It didn't matter what the others thought of me. Nothing mattered except Fred. I heard the scrape of metal as Barry picked up the chair, and the click of the door as they went out. I was glad they were gone. Part of me knew I was now locked inside, and that it could be dangerous, but I didn't care. All I cared about was Fred. I thought about Fred as a puppy, about Fred waiting eagerly for me to come home from school, about Fred careening through the meadow, his long ears catching on things. I tried hard not to think about what it had been like for Fred to be trapped in here, getting hungry, getting weak, barking and whimpering and crying to be let out, and no one coming to help him for days and days. I didn't think at all about how much time was going by or what that meant. And what had happened to Fred was Barry's fault. Eventually, my knees got stiff and sore and my feet kept falling asleep, and my eyes and throat began to ache from crying. I stood up and looked blearily around the small room. There were some other thin bones scattered about on the floor, and more cobwebs. I sat down on the bed. I saw then that I wasn't locked in after all. Barry had left the keys on the table so that I'd be able to get out whenever I wanted. It was a thoughtful gesture, but irrelevant. I couldn't forgive him for what had happened to Fred. At least after this, he would see that the playhouse was too dangerous to fool around with. He would have to agree that the best thing to do was lock it up and stay away from it. Or would he? The more I brooded about it, the more convinced I was that Barry wouldn't see it my way. He would be upset about Fred, but he'd still be fascinated by the playhouse, and arguing with him wouldn't make any difference. His curiosity and appetite for adventure were too strong to be affected by logic. Not until we went home. Not until we went home. And it was physically impossible for him to get to the playhouse. Would Barry leave it alone? My eyes fell on the keys, and I knew what I had to do. Before, I wouldn't have had the guts to consider it. Even now, after Fred, I knew that Barry would not forgive me for it. But I didn't care. I hadn't forgiven him either. With the playhouse keys at the bottom of the river, we'd be safe from it, and maybe that would make up, in a small way, for what had happened to Fred. But I had to act, not sit around thinking about it. I knew myself well enough to see that I must do it, fast, before I lost my nerve. And now I had a chance. Barry had been hungry. They were probably back at the house eating. I'd be able to dash down to the river and dispose of the keys without anybody trying to stop me. And then everything would be solved. I turned the keys in the lock, pulled open the door, and rushed out. And plunged into a life-size photograph, a still from a movie. Barry and Lucy were poised at the playhouse door. One of Barry's feet was lifted, caught in mid-step. His mouth stretched open, his tongue slightly curled and immobile between his upper and lower teeth. Lucy faced him, a single tear, solid as a transparent glass bead, affixed to her cheek. There was dead silence. A large white butterfly hung motionless in the air, a foot above Lucy's head. Only I was moving, with such momentum that I couldn't stop myself. I lurched between Barry and Lucy, brushing my shoulders as I scraped against their stone-like bodies. My foot caught in the threshold, and I tumbled forward onto the grass. I rolled over. Barry and Lucy slowly began to bend, pushed apart by the impact of my body. They tipped away from each other millimeter by millimeter, like a film gradually speeding up. The butterfly crept forward, its wings moving with sluggish deliberateness, as though it were trapped in molasses. Behind them, foliage blinked and shivered. There was a whooshing sound, like air filling a vacuum cleaner. It became a gravelly rumble, rapidly rising in pitch, taking on more voices. A racing scream of wind and insects and water. Barry and Lucy's faces melted into expressions of shock as they neared the ground. They landed, the playhouse door slammed shut, the butterfly dipped and sailed away. The noisy crescendo stabilized into the muted buzzing murmur of a summer day. Huh? Barry said, sitting up and rubbing his shoulder. Where do you come from? Lucy could only stare at me. You just sprang up out of nowhere, Barry said, beginning to get to his feet. I had forgotten what I was doing. If I hadn't just sat there, gaping stupidly at the world coming to life, I could have had a head start, and I needed one because Barry can run faster than me. It was probably already too late. Then I thought of Fred. I sprang up and dashed out of the circle of trees. Barry was stunned. Maybe I had a chance. I fled past the sundial. I heard a startled shout behind me and then footsteps thudding on the hard earth. But I didn't slow myself down by turning back to look. I ran for the underbrush and the trees. Hey, wait, where are you going with those keys? They were still dangling from my hand. Barry knew what I was doing. I had to get them in the water before he caught me. I tore through the jungle-like underbrush and slipped and skidded down the slope. I had reached the vast, shallow part of the river where the bottom was visible. I wanted the slow, dark pool where the keys would be irretrievably lost. I stumbled along the stony bank, gasping. I could hear the crunch of gravel as Barry closed in on me. I would never make the pool. I threw the keys into the noisy water. Then I was pushed violently from behind. I tumbled forward, my hands in the river. Barry splashed past me. He waded out to the middle, sliding on the slippery rocks. He fell to his knees, not thinking about getting drenched, and ran his hands over the bottom. The water there was about an inch deep. In a moment, he turned toward me, still sitting in the water, and held up both keys. I had managed to keep my shirt from getting wet and was standing on the bank. Lucy came trotting up beside me. I didn't want to look at her. I felt foolish, and I wanted Fred back. Everything was awful. Barry stood up in the water. Don't do that again, he said calmly. He wasn't out of breath at all. He put the keys in his mouth, peeled off his sopping t-shirt, balled it up, and threw it on the bank. He untied his sneakers and kicked them after the shirt. He buttoned the playhouse keys into the back pocket of his running shorts. He put his hand on his hips. How about that swim, he said. Lucy was staring at him. Barry and I have the same plump-cheeked face, the same small nose and rounded chin, and we're the same height. But Barry is an athlete, and I hate sports. His body is lean and hard, and I'm a little soft. I could tell by the way Lucy watched him that she was impressed by his body. Barry knew it, too. She turned toward me. You want to go in? I shook my head. How could Barry even think of going swimming now? I'm sorry about your dog, she said shyly. At least she seemed uncomfortable about going swimming right after Fred had died. But she couldn't resist Barry. I got my suit on underneath, she called back to him. Then, turning away from me, with a guilty expression, she began taking off her shoes. I left them and walked back to the house, staying well away from the circle of trees around the playhouse. In the kitchen, I saw Fred's feeding bowls and almost started crying again. I still needed to take some kind of action. Barry had squelched me over the playhouse keys, as he always squelched me. Wasn't there anything I could do? My eyes fell on the house keys hanging on a hook over the table. I thought of the locked attic and the locked metal box where we had found the first playhouse key. I took the keys and went upstairs. Inside the box were 4 books, a small bundle of letters tied with string, and a leather-bound volume that seemed to be a diary. I locked the empty box and took its contents down to my room. I hated the playhouse. I was terrified of it, but I also couldn't help being curious. It had only been a few minutes ago that I had come rushing out of it into the strangest experiences of my life. Maybe, if I understood a little more about it, I wouldn't be so afraid. I examined the contents of the box. There was nothing ominous about the books, which seemed to be physics texts full of formulas. I flipped through them quickly and then put them on the floor. The letters were from university professors. Maybe later I would study them, but at the moment I was too keyed up. I put them with the books and opened the leather-bound volume. It was a diary, hastily scrawled in pencil. The first date seemed to be May 6, 1919. I flipped through it quickly to see how recently Uncle Ambrose had last written in it. Toward the end, the handwriting deteriorated. The last entry was dated this year, but had no month or day. It was practically illegible, the letters half-formed, obscured by smudges, but I wanted to know the last thing he had written. I persevered, and after about 10 minutes I thought I had it. The entry read, "Today I saw it. It progresses. Afraid. Remember the other one. Hope walls strong enough. Keep it from getting out." And that is the end of chapter 8.